Thank you to everybody for coming out tonight. I'm Jim Breckman, the city manager for the city. As you know, while you're here, we've got some ballot questions, and this is the second of two of these Millage open house workshops. This is the presentation part of the night. We've got about a 20-25 minute presentation. Try to keep it brief and to the point. We'll have some time for questions after that. But I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you about, and I'm going to tell you about it. The overview of the presentation. So first, revenue. It's really why we're here. What's happened with revenue, what the city's done to address the problem with revenue, and then what our plan is to finish fixing the problem. We're going to talk about the cuts that have been made to date, what the city's done to save some costs. As part of this continuing initiative, the city convened a Citizens Advisory Committee which made some recommendations for further measures the city could take to cut costs. A general operating millage request. I'm going to talk about what it is that we're asking for, and then we also have a parks improvement millage on the ballot. If you're looking at the stations, we also have a renewal of the library services agreement. We're not going to talk about that. That's just a straight renewal of an existing millage. Be happy to answer any questions you have about that, but we're not going to talk about it in the presentation. So first, revenue. Why are we here? And this is the story of why we're here. This is real revenue, which means it's adjusted for inflation. Going back 10 years, you can see that there have been real trends. Over this 6-year period, from 2004 until the end of 2010, revenue averaged about $2.8 million a year. That was what the city's general fund revenue was after you adjust back for inflation. And then there was the drop. Local government revenues are trailing, so when there's an economic downturn, it's usually a year or 2 years before that filters through because of the way property taxes are assessed and the way valuations trail the market. So this was the result of the economic downturn and the loss in housing values and the loss in state revenue sharing that we suffered. And since fiscal year 2010 and 11, we've been at $2.44 million average general fund revenue after adjusting for inflation every year. So that's an annual loss of $360,000 of revenue to the city. So currently, the general fund budget is 2.44, probably closer to 2.5 million for this current fiscal year. So a loss of $360,000 is significant for a town like Pleasant Ridge. Why? Why did we have this drop and why are we here tonight? Well, we've got this local government financing environment in Michigan, where we have the Headley Amendment, which you've probably heard of at this point. We've got Prop A, which was enacted in 1994. And these two work together in ways that may be different than what was expected or anticipated or intended. Maybe not. Maybe it is what was intended. But the problem we have is that these two amendments occurred during times of high inflation and then high property tax value growth. There's some assumptions that there's perpetual growth, and they really don't account now for property values falling or growing slower than inflation. So let me tell you what I mean. When property values grow at or above inflation, so this is property values, and then this is the rate of inflation, what happens is the Headley Amendment said that we're going to lower the millage rate that everybody pays so that the revenue the city collects only grows at a level that's equal to that inflation rate. So property values go up 10% in a year, but the inflation rate's 2%, it would roll down the millage rate so that the city only grew the revenues at 2%. That was enacted in 1978, and it makes sense. It's also why our general operating millage is at 11.4 mils now, when it used to be 20 mils, which is authorized by the city charter, and it's what's authorized by state law. So because of that rollback over time to ensure our revenues only grew at a rate equal to inflation, the general fund operating millage has gone down to 11.4 mils. In the past, before Prop A was enacted, when property values went down or went down at a rate greater than inflation, the Headley Amendment would actually allow the cities to roll the millage rate back up so that revenues would match inflation. Well, Prop A was passed in 1994 and it took that ability away. So the city could no longer roll up millage rates so that our revenues would grow equal to inflation. If we had still had that ability, there would have been no change in this continued real revenue, and everything would have been fine, really. But The situation now, because Prop A does not allow you to roll the millage rate up, is when property values go up, the millage rate goes down to make sure that this grows at the rate equal to inflation. But then when property values fall, you can't change the millage rate, so it stays flat, and then revenue to the city declines. So that's the basic story for why we are here. And this shows you that city taxable value, which is what property values are assessed on, was pretty equal with the rate of inflation until there was that drop in taxable value. Inflation kept going up, and now the increase in taxable value has continued to stay about the same as the rate of inflation. And that's again because Prop A limits the growth in taxable value on your home to the rate of inflation. So because of that, you can see the drop coincided. So often what we hear is, property values are increasing. We know this, and they've increased strongly in the past couple of years, but that won't solve the city's problem. We often hear that, well, property values are going up, tax revenues are going to go up. The problem is because you have two values on your property assessment: equalized value, which is the assessed value, and taxable value. There's no limit on what the equalized or assessed value can go up. That can go up 15%, 100%, 300%. There's no limit on that. That's just the market value of your house. Actually, it's half of the market value of your house, the way they assess it. But taxable value can only go up at the rate equal to inflation. So in a situation where we have rising property values, the city is only going to get additional revenue equal to the rate of inflation. But because of the declines in property value, our new base has fallen. So we can't make up that $360,000 gap through rising property values. The benefit will accrue to the residents. And another thing to point out is that when houses are uncapped, so you may know that when a house is sold, the value goes from that taxable value up to the assessed value in a year. So uncapped property taxes would seem to generate more revenue for the city, but because when that happens, so say a house was assessed at $50,000, it's sold, now it's assessed at $100,000, that's a 100% increase. What happens is that additional revenue to the city that would be accrued to the city, the millage rate gets rolled down to make sure that that revenue then only equals the rate of inflation. So when a house becomes uncapped, the benefit doesn't accrue to the city. It actually benefits to every other homeowner in town because your property tax assessment goes down a little bit to make up for that excess revenue that would have been generated by the uncapped. So this $360,000 number is the key number to keep in mind. That's the real revenue change adjusted for inflation. So the past 5 years, to make up for that lost revenue, the city did undertake a number of cuts. Renegotiating the Ferndale Fire contract saved about $100,000 a year. Some cuts to DPW services cut about $45,000 a year. You can see all of these cuts that we've made, and the sum total is about $215,000 of annual savings. Now the key thing about these cuts that have made to date is that these are sustainable. These are reductions and efficiencies in the services that the city delivers that we can keep doing without any additional cuts being necessary. We can keep these going into the future. We don't need to make this revenue up, is the important point. But of course, $360,000 minus $215,000 leaves us a gap of $145,000 annually that the city's been plugging in different ways. First way is deferred maintenance and capital improvements. The pool, we've not done some maintenance to the pool. Relining it, the heater, has constant maintenance that we kind of put Band-Aids on. That's been about $68,000 of work that we haven't done. If you look at the ceiling tiles, you can see behind you that the community center roof leaks every time it rains. We haven't repaired that, and that's probably a $50,000 cost when all is said and done. Deferred capital improvements for the police. Police cars typically have a lifespan of about 85 or 90,000 miles in 4 years. It's heavy usage. They take a beating. They're running for 8 hours or 12 hours a day, sometimes more. We have a couple of police cars that are 7 years old, 8 years old, that have 120 or pushing 130,000 miles on them. The maintenance is getting to be constant and regular. They're at the end of their lifespan, and we haven't been able to afford to replace those. Other police equipment, we're overdue on bulletproof vests. Our police aren't in danger, but we haven't replaced those on schedule. there's been quite a bit of police deferred maintenance. And talk to the chief who's here, he can tell you all about that. Sidewalks and tree planting. So if you look at the amount of street the city has, we know a sidewalk lasts about 70 years, and we know that a tree typically has a lifespan of about 100 years. So if you take all of the linear footage of our streets and figure out how much of that you should be replacing every year to make sure that we're continuously maintaining our sidewalks and renewing our tree canopy, the costs would be about $6,000 a year for tree planting and about $20,000 a year for sidewalks. We have not been doing that. We haven't planted a tree along a street in 3 or 4 years now, and you can see that as we take trees down, there's holes that are starting in our tree canopy. And these aren't just things that are nice to do. We know that tree-lined streets add 15% to property values. There have been a number of studies done all over the country, and that 15% number comes up all the time. That adds value to your house, that adds property value. And of course, sidewalks are a value and a liability that the city has to stay on top of. So deferred maintenance is part of how we plug that $145,000 a year by not doing maintenance that we should be doing, and deferred maintenance is not avoided maintenance. The other part has been fund balance draws. In 2006, we had a fund balance of $850,000, not adjusted for inflation, that's nominal value. And today we're at $530,000. So we've drawn $40,000 out of our savings every year to keep the city running and providing the services at a level that we have in the past. But for a city of our size, best practice is 25 to 30% of your general fund expenditures to hold and fund balance, to provide working capital so that you can pay your bills, while you're floating, and to buffer against those unexpected events that happen, floods in basements or storms that knock down trees all over town, things you can't budget for. Right now we're at 21%, and we're getting to the point where if our fund balance draws down any further, it's going to be hard to have enough working capital on a day-to-day basis without really scrambling, and that's not a great situation to be in, particularly if we get another black swan event. And then we've been drawing down $35,000 extra from the segregated capital asset fund every year to be used for rec center and pool operations. We have a millage that pays for the pool, but it's $70,000 short. The money that it generates is $70,000 short of what it actually costs to run the pool. So we have to subsidize that every year. And that's come out of the general fund and it's come out of SCAF. The problem with the SCAF fund is that there's a corpus limit, which was the money the city received from the state, that grew over time. We've drawn that balance down where we're at the corpus limit. And by ordinance, we're not supposed to use any more of that money. That's supposed to be the principal, like in an endowment fund. We're supposed to live off the interest. So we've spent down that fund balance in SCAF. And we don't want to start spending principal every year to keep the pool running. So this is the math, $250,000 of service cuts that are sustainable, $70,000 deferred and capital maintenance, and then $75,000 of fund balance draws gets us to this $360,000 number. For graphic learners, we don't need this money back. This is the problem. So the city convened a Citizens Advisory Committee in January to basically, after the last millage request last fall failed, to regroup, to look at finances, to say, what can we do? Can we cut more sustainably? And do we really need more revenue? They came back with a number of recommendations. And their recommendations were to look at cost savings and efficiencies before asking for a new millage. We've done that. We've started that work. We continue to work on that, but let me run you through what their recommendations were. So competitive bid schedule. These are our major service providers, and when the contracts run up, the intent is to competitively bid these contracts out to try to realize savings. Planning right off the bat, since my background is actually out of planning, I'm doing a lot more of the planning work that we would have formerly farmed out. So I can say that we're going to save at least $10,000 a year on this, just by bringing more of that in-house and doing it ourselves. Plant Moran, this is a good price. I don't know that there's a lot of savings there on, to be honest. AEW, our hourly rate and their bills are, as far as consulting engineers go, right in line. I don't think there's a ton of savings to be realized out of the engineering contract. Auditing is a small number. I always say cut rate auditors are something that you really don't want to get involved with. So I don't know that there's a lot of savings to be had there. We might be able to save $4,000 or $5,000, but the risk involved in that savings would be significant. Brylar has been cut back very far. The cost of running a public DPW department, if you had that in-house with employee costs and everything, we get a fantastic deal on our DPW services. And dispatch with Berkeley, this number, I don't know what that number looks like. We might be able to get some savings there, but that's not until 2017 that we can rebid that out. So we're looking at, I would say, $10,000 to $15,000 of savings, maybe 20 out of this menu of service providers. CAC had some employee benefit recommendations. We have 9 total staff that are on defined benefit plans. That's in our police department and full-time city administrative staff. The recommendation was to convert those, to look at converting all of those defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans, which we did, but our defined benefit plan is only 60% funded. So by MERS rules, if we wanted to convert all of those to defined contributions, we would have to accelerate and get up to 80% or 100% funded within 3 years. Even if we just brought it up to 80% and closed the plan to new hires so that all new hires went on to a defined contribution plan, you'd have to get to an accelerated 80% over 10 years. The sum is that it would cost the city $80,000 to $100,000 more every year to convert that over. So what we did is we basically opened up a new defined contribution plan for new hires without closing the MERS one. So I'm on a defined contribution plan. I don't get a defined benefit pension. That will save the city money in 20 years. So this is like planting a tree. There will be savings. We won't see them for 20 years.
What is our legacy cost?
Pardon?
What is our legacy cost?
Legacy costs for retirement, our legacy costs are about $140,000 a year. And for employee health care, I'd have to look. But employee health care is smaller, and those are phasing out as we go forward. So, the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best is today. So it's kind of the same kind of situation. Also looking at paid time off versus sick time, we have implemented some policy changes where sick time is paid out at 50% of value beyond a certain limit. We've reduced the total amount of sick time employees can carry, similar to a paid time off. That's a private sector model. We kind of kept it within a public sector model, but have reduced the city's liabilities there. That will save the city some money, probably $3,000 to $4,000 a year. That was a win that we were able to get. A PEO study, that's a professional employment organization. The CAC recommended we look at that. Again, that's a private sector model for smaller businesses and smaller employment groups. Basically, just to put it in a nutshell, the employees of the business become the employees of the PEO, the professional employment organization, who then pools healthcare, pools retirement. It gets efficiencies. But because of differences in private sector and public sector employment, the different laws and the different state, the way that those are regulated, it's difficult to do. All the PEOs that we talked to, and we talked to a few of them, none of them had public sector clients. Some of them could have offered us unemployment insurance and healthcare insurance, but they actually couldn't beat what we were getting, so there were no cost savings to be found there. And then the police contract, that opens in 2018. That would likely be some of the same things, new hires on defined contributions, some of those same things that administrative staff have taken because there is no contract, would be moved over to new hires for the police department at that time. So there will be savings, but it won't solve our problems today. The CAC recommended we look at the pool and the rec center. They thought it was important to maintain existing pool hours and community center hours because those have been cut back over the past 5 years. And cutting back further would impact quality of life for residents. But looking at doing fees for guest passes to the pool. And we had some data on this because we used to do it. In 2004, every household got 10 free passes and then could buy additional passes for $10 a piece. And in that year, there were 111 guest passes purchased. So that generated $1,100 for the city. And you can see the total number of passes that have been used. Over time, the city has given out more passes to each household. So we've gone down from that $1,100 of revenue every year to about $20 of revenue every year for guest passes. The question becomes, if we started charging and took away the free guest passes from households, would the impact on houses who've gotten used to getting 35 guest passes every year, would it be worth the $1,000 of revenue that we would get? Probably not. Not a fight I necessarily want to take on. Another one was looking at non-resident rental rate for the community center. As you know, you can rent out the community center for events if you're a resident. We used to do it for non-residents. That ended in 2009. So we went back and looked at the numbers for how much it generated for the city and how much it cost. And basically, it was a net decrease in revenue of $1,650 a year. The net decrease, the gross decrease in revenue was closer to $4,000 or $5,000 a year, but not surprisingly, non-residents are a little harder on the building. And it was actually increased staffing time to clean, maintain, fix, because they didn't necessarily take the care of the building that we do, that we're already paying for on our taxes that we own. Savings to date. These are things that we've done. These are done. We're going to save $10,000 a year on our phone and information technology. We're converting over from standard landline phones to voice over internet phones. And that's going to save us $10,000 a year. This year we looked at employee health care and did some plan option changes. That's going to save us $12,500 a year. And this is at a time when our agent is telling us that because of the Affordable Care Act, small groups are seeing typically anywhere from 20 to 40% and sometimes 60 to 80% increases in their rates. And we were able to actually cut our healthcare costs. So when you look at that $12,500, that's a savings. But when you look at what we avoided, it's closer to $60,000 of savings that we're able to do. So we're proud of that. So $145,000, the cuts and savings I've talked to you about don't add up to $145,000. We think we can save more with some future efficiencies, but we have some work to do. CEC also looked at administrative service charges, and this will become important in a moment when we look at the millage request and how it's structured. But administrative service charges are money that the city pays itself, basically. So the way the city's budget works is it's like buckets. And there's three major buckets. There's the general fund, which is funded by property taxes and transfers from state government, state revenue sharing, things like that. That all goes in the general fund bucket. You've got the water and sewer fund, which is a separate bucket. So when you get your utility bills and there's the water portion of it, the money you pay goes in the water bucket. And that pays for the cost of water, pays for maintaining the sewer and water system. And then there's the solid waste fund bucket. You also pay for that on your utility bills, but that's a $43 every quarter flat fee charge. We have a solid waste millage, doesn't generate enough money to pay for the solid waste services. We have the flat fee that makes up for the rest of it. So out of these three buckets is how we basically run the major elements of the city. The administrative service charges are something where the city says, where the budget is set up that out of the water fund and out of the solid waste fund, some of that money is taken and moved into the city's general fund as an administrative charge. The time and the effort it costs city staff to run those funds. And that's a common practice, except we are at 16% of our general fund revenue, or $376,000, is coming out of other funds in the general fund. And when you look at the average across dozens of cities, and we looked at dozens of cities to get a baseline for what an administrative service charge usually is, it's about 4% of revenue, which would equal $100,000 for our town. So the Citizen Advisory Committee recommended that we eliminate those administrative service charges. That would require doing a $276,000 cost reallocation, which basically consists of moving some money you pay from utility, for water, for garbage, moving it on to property taxes to pay for the administrative staff that we have to run the city. So the general operating millage request, we're asking for 2.9 mils. That would generate $384,000 a year right now. When you take the $276,000 of that will be offset because it's going to lower your water and solid waste charges. So that's an offset. That won't generate any new money for the city. We're just going to collect it in a different way. That results in new revenue of $108,000. The benefit of reducing the administrative service charges is it's going to actually bring the cost of water that you pay closer to the true cost of the water. And that's the theory behind reducing the administrative service charges. So $108,000 of new revenue. $145,000 is our gap. So that leaves I did the math bad last time, $37,000 that we have to plug. So that's where our additional savings, the $12,000 we saved on healthcare, the $10,000 we're saving on phones, the $3,000 we're saving on converting our sick time payouts. All those little things we're pursuing to make up for that $37,000 gap in revenue. So you add those two together, and we can plug our hole of $145,000 a year. And if you want to break it out even further, it'd be 0.55 mils to plug that $75,000 fund balance draw, 0.25 mils to help reduce some of that capital maintenance spending. So the actual increase would be 0.8 mils that you would be paying, because that 2.1 mils to offset the administrative service charges, you'd see a savings in your utility bills. What are we going to use it for? Well, maintaining our independent police is the number one thing that shows up on all our surveys. It's maybe the most treasured thing that we have in Pleasant Ridge is having our own police force. Well, if you're going to have your own police force, you have to buy them police cars, and you have to give them the equipment that they need to do the job. And we fall behind on that, so we need to start catching up on our independent police. The way the analogy I use is you can't fly half a plane. You have to have an entire plane. So we're a small town, and in order to run a government, there's a baseline cost that goes along with that. And at a certain point, you can't reduce costs anymore. So because we have the luxury, it really is a luxury and it's a privilege to have our own government for a 2,500 person town. You can walk into City Hall and you know everyone who works there. It's different than in a 100,000 person town where you get some additional cost savings on a per person basis. But that translates into maintaining our independent Pleasant Ridge police force. On a per capita basis, we pay a little bit more than a lot of towns do. But that's just because a police car costs the same here as it costs in Berkeley, and there's fewer people to allocate that cost over in terms of households. Maintaining fire and EMS as it stands today with Ferndale, that was another thing that's been important in all of our surveys. This will allow us to do that. Reduce solid waste and water fees, your utility bills will go down. We'll be able to maintain our pool and our community center. We'll be able to maintain and fix our street trees and sidewalks and begin to rebuild our tree canopy. Parks maintenance is something that we don't do as much of as we used to. We can keep our parks in better shape than we have. Snow and leaf removal services will be maintained as they stand today, and we can stop living off savings. Most importantly, it'll allow us to keep this baseline level of services that we have today. We've patched over a lot of problems in the budget over the last 5 years, but we're out of paper. We can't paper over those problems anymore. So if the millage fails, there are going to be cuts. There are going to be changes that we've been able to not make so far that we will have to make going forward, and it will impact the quality of life that we enjoy in Pleasant Ridge. So, what's the cost impact? We calculated it out for most households, and we had to do this because we have two parts of this. We have utility bills where each household is going to save, and then each household is going to pay more on property taxes. And that's not an easy calculation because it's different for every household. It depends on your property value, your assessed value. It depends on how much water you use every year. So we actually ran an analysis for every house based on how much water that house used, the property tax value, what that would do. And then we calculated out for most households, which is one standard deviation from the mean, which takes in 2/3 of houses in the city. They'll see a $63 savings. Some houses are actually going to see a net reduction in what they pay to the city every year, to a $164 increase. That's most households. The households that are going to get the biggest hit, those are big, expensive houses that don't use a lot of water. Kind of the worst case scenario for those is about $500. But those are, the top 2%. Very few of those houses. The average annual net cost increase is $87 when you average it out across the city. So basically, this would be our new revenue level. And at this point, our annual revenues would, because of Headley and Prop A, motor along at this point, but we have what we needed to keep the city running. We know it's an important point. When people are shopping for houses, property values are influenced by the tax rate you pay. So we took this into account in the analysis. You have a household budget that you can spend every month on your mortgage, on interest, on property taxes, on water, on all of these things. And if you're paying more on property taxes, that means you can pay less for that house. So in one community that has a low tax rate, the houses can be higher in value because there's more money to be spent on the mortgage. Lathrop Village has a lot of houses. Lathrop Village is fairly similar in terms of its housing stock to Pleasant Ridge. It's very similar to Pleasant Ridge in the size of the town. It's not much bigger than us. But they pay very, very high property taxes because of Southfield schools and because they have high city property taxes. And if you look at property values in the Village, for a similar house to what you can get here, their property values are lower than ours, objectively, for the same house. And it's because of that property tax impact every month. So we know that this is a consideration. If approved, this general operating millage would take our current rate of 11.3 mils. I said 11.4 earlier, it's actually 11.3. And then raise it to 14.2 mils. The total homestead millage rate, when you factor in schools, the county, the DIA, the zoo, all of those other things that get rolled into your property tax bill. And that's an important point. When you pay your property taxes, less than half of that actually goes to the city. Most of it's going to other taxing jurisdictions. The total rate that homeowners would pay would go from 41.7 to 44.6. So what's that look like on a graph? Well, right now, for all Oakland County communities, we are right here, kind of on one of the stair steps. The new approved rate, if the millage passes, would go up to a little under 45. So we would pass Keego Harbor, but we would still be lower than Wixom, Birmingham, Farmington, Madison Heights, Huntington Woods, Clawson, Hazel Park. So when people are cross-shopping homes, this wouldn't change our relative position. This won't have an appreciable impact on property values. Ballot language, we have sample ballots, so you can read that if you'd like. So that's a general operating millage. And we'll come back for questions in a minute. I'm going to talk about the parks improvement millage real quick for what this is going to do for the city. As you may know, the city adopted a Parks and Recreation Master Plan. You have to do these every 5 years per the state. We completed one about a year ago. It recommended a 5-year improvement plan with $1.2 million of projects. A major project was Gainsborough Park. That park hasn't seen a lot of attention or love, and I don't know when the last time it did. So that was a major focus of the plan. But also a community center park, trying to improve the park area behind the pool, maybe even connecting the building to that park, so that can be an outdoor space that can be connected to this room to increase the utility and value here at the community center. The foundation, as you may know, this year stepped up big time and committed $150,000. They basically picked some projects out of the Parks and Rec Master Plan that they wanted to fund, and those are done or in progress at Gainsborough Park. So there's tangible results from it. The shelter, residents can get a key card now and can get into the shelter building with the bathrooms over at the park between, I think, when the park's open, basically dawn to dusk. So you can always get in that building. They're sponsoring the Tot Lot. They're putting in improvements for the toddler play area there. So the Gainsborough Improvement Plan, shelter improvements, those have been partially done, generously funded by the foundation. Covered pavilion to provide some outdoor covered gathering space at Gainsborough Park, so the weather becomes less of a factor whether or not you can use the park. The toddler play structure being funded by the foundation. New swing set, our current swings don't meet ADA current standards, we have to replace them. That will be part of the plan. Sports courts improvements. If you play tennis or basketball, you know the courts need some help. Your ball kind of bounces off this. Pavement's not in great shape. DPW lot improvements, trying to make this more usable. Right now it really kind of divides Gainsborough from Flynn Field, and we want to try to make this more of a permeable space that can provide some parking and make some better use of that space. Sidewalks and walking paths throughout the entire park. This is a passive recreation amenity to promote, it's not passive, it's active, to promote walking. New fence along the railroad tracks. If you've seen the fence, it's a fence in name only in some places. Needs replacement. And finally, irrigation to, when we have dry summers, the park gets very hard. It really impacts the usability of the park. Total capital funding we're asking for, that $1.2 million was the total program. The foundation funded a large part of that. So the city, we're asking if we want to step up and if we want to make these improvements to the parks. The term is 10 years, $99,000 of annual revenue. Millage is a 0.75 property tax millage. We can say that that's an average annual cost of $82 per household. And what I always go back to is when you look at ads for houses that are for sale on Realtor.com or elsewhere in Pleasant Ridge, you often see the community center advertised as one of the amenities. So you'll have the pictures of the house and the kitchen and the bathroom upstairs and the nice backyard, and then you'll get to a picture of the pool and the community center, because this is an amenity that actually builds value to the house. Realtors don't take pictures that make the house look bad. They want to sell you on it. So that tells me that the community center adds value. Well, this was actually a listing that's on right now for 64 Maywood, and they had a picture of Gainsborough Park. I want this to look better. I want this to be an amenity. And this is the first time I've seen Gainsborough Park advertised in one of our home listings. So I want to see that happen all the time. And that's really the goal with this Parks and Recreation Millage, is to turn Gainsborough Park into something that does build value, that does attract families, that does serve the needs of seniors and anyone else who just wants to go walk around the park and have a sidewalk to do that for recreation. Questions, you can call me. Phone number's right there. You can email me, citymanager@cityofpleasantridge.org.